Sir, you need to leave now.
What? I'm just having coffee.
The manager says you're making people uncomfortable. You're trespassing.
I bought this 10 minutes ago. I'm not bothering anyone.
Are you leaving, or do I need to remove?
Officer Frank Simmons had been with the Houston Police Department for 9 years when he walked into a coffee shop on a Wednesday morning and made a decision that would end everything he'd built. He was 36 years old, experienced enough to know the protocols, confident enough to ignore them. That morning, he responded to a call from a shift manager reporting a woman who was lingering too long and making the wrong kind of people uncomfortable. The woman was Special Agent Jessie Pena, a 14-year FBI veteran sitting upright at a corner table in a navy blue blazer, laptop open, dark roast cooling beside her, preparing for a 10 a.m. briefing with a federal informant. What Simmons did next, dismissing her credentials as a prop, gripping her arm, and physically steering her out of a packed coffee shop while dozens of witnesses raised their phones, would become one of the most documented civil rights violations in Houston's recent history. And it would cost him his badge, his career, and the city of Houston $4 million. Before we go further, where are you watching from? If this is your first time here, hit that subscribe button. These stories need to be told, and your support is what makes that possible. Bravo Grounds Coffee sits in the heart of Houston's downtown business district, on the ground floor of a glass office tower on Main Street, half a block from the courthouse. It is exactly the kind of place that fills up before 9 a.m. with people who have somewhere important to be. Attorneys reviewing briefs on their laptops, analysts on calls with their earbuds in, executives nursing espressos between meetings. Warm wood paneling, floor-to-ceiling windows, the smell of fresh grounds and ambition. It was 8:40 a.m. on a Wednesday in October. The morning rush was locked in. Every table was taken. The ordering line curved past the door. Special Agent Jessie Pena had been with the FBI for 14 years. 14 years of cases that demanded not just intelligence, but the kind of patience that most people never develop, the ability to build evidence quietly, methodically, over months without tipping your hand. She'd spent 4 years in organized crime, infiltrating networks that moved money through shell corporations in silence. 6 years in counter-narcotics, dismantling trafficking pipelines that crossed 3 state lines and 2 international borders. She'd coordinated operations with the DEA, testified before federal grand juries, and received commendations from 2 sitting U.S. attorneys who called her, separately and without coordination, one of the sharpest agents they'd worked with. Her colleagues had a shorter version. Pena doesn't miss. At 38 years old, Jessie Pena was sitting at the exact intersection of everything she had sacrificed to reach. Trusted with complex investigations, responsible for a federal informant relationship, and preparing on that Wednesday morning for a briefing that could crack open a narcotics case her division had been building for 11 months. She had arrived at Bravo Grounds at 8:20 a.m. She ordered a medium dark roast at the counter, carried it to a corner table near the window, set down her bag, opened her laptop, and got to work. She was wearing a navy blue blazer over a white blouse, sitting upright, completely still, the posture of someone with a lot on their mind and total command of it. Her FBI credentials were in the inside pocket of her blazer. Her case notes were open on the screen in front of her. She had done nothing wrong. She was about to be treated like she had. Bravo Grounds was not the kind of place you wandered into by accident. You had to know it was there. Tucked into the ground floor of a steel and glass office tower on Main Street, its entrance marked by nothing more than a brushed bronze sign and the smell of single-origin beans drifting through the revolving door. The regulars found it years ago and never left. The newcomers found it through someone who worked in the building and guarded the recommendation like a secret worth keeping. Inside, the space was long and warm. Reclaimed wood lined the walls from floor to ceiling. Pendant lights hung low over the bar in amber clusters. The ceiling stretched up 2 full stories, and the morning light came through the front windows in wide, clean columns that fell across tables already crowded with open laptops and half-finished cups. It was the kind of room that had a rhythm to it, the low percussion of keyboards, the occasional murmur of a phone call kept deliberately quiet, the hiss of the espresso machine marking time behind the counter. By 8:40 a.m. on that Wednesday in October, every seat was taken. At the bar, a man in a charcoal suit had his laptop open and his phone pressed to his ear, speaking in the clipped shorthand of someone already 30 minutes into their workday. 2 women near the back shared a table without sharing a conversation, each absorbed in their own screen. A younger man by the window had 3 browser tabs open and a yellow legal pad beside his coffee, filling lines with handwritten notes. Across from him, a woman in reading glasses was marking up a document with a red pen, flipping pages with the focused efficiency of someone on a deadline. This was a room full of people with places to be and work to do. A room that functioned, every morning, as an extension of the offices above it. Jessie Pena fit into it perfectly. Someone was about to decide she didn't. Legal reality check. The rule. Under the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment, a business open to the public cannot lawfully remove a customer based on race. A paying customer who violates no policy has a legal right to remain on the premises. The red flag. Pena had purchased coffee, was seated quietly, and had violated 0 stated policies of Bravo grounds. Every other customer in that room had been present just as long or longer without drawing a single complaint. The consequence: when a business calls police to remove a customer based on race rather than conduct, it opens itself to civil rights liability. Bravo grounds would eventually pay $700,000 to learn this lesson. Jessie Pena had wanted to be in the FBI since she was 17 years old, sitting in a federal courthouse in San Antonio watching a prosecutor dismantle a money laundering case piece by meticulous piece. She didn't want to be the prosecutor. She wanted to be the person who built the case that made the prosecution possible. She wanted to be the one who found the thread nobody else saw and pulled until everything unraveled. 14 years later, that was exactly what she did. She had spent her first 4 years in the organized crime division, learning how criminal networks disguised money, moved people, and insulated the people at the top from the consequences at the bottom. Then 6 years in counter-narcotics, where she helped dismantle 3 trafficking pipelines operating across Texas, Louisiana, and New Mexico. Operations that had been running for years before her team found the financial seam that cracked them open. 2 U.S. attorneys had commended her work by name in federal filings. Her division chief had called her, more than once, the agent who made cases no one else could close. She was 38 years old. She had earned every year of it. That Wednesday morning, Pena had arrived at Bravo grounds at 8:20 a.m. She ordered at the counter without looking at the menu. Medium dark roast, no modifications, the same thing she ordered everywhere, and carried it to the corner table near the window she'd already scoped when she walked in. She set her bag on the chair beside her, opened her laptop, and pulled up the case file she'd been reviewing since 6 that morning. Her navy blue blazer was pressed. Her white blouse was clean. She sat upright, both feet on the floor, the way she always sat when she was working through something that required her full attention. She looked exactly like what she was. A federal agent. Professional. A woman with a 10 a.m. meeting and 11 months of investigative work riding on it. She had done nothing wrong. A 14-year federal agent with 2 U.S. attorney commendations. Is that enough to be seen as a professional in a coffee shop? Yes or a no? Drop your answer in the comments. Marcus Webb had been the shift manager at Bravo grounds for 2 years. He was 31, ambitious in the way that people are when they've mistaken control over a small space for authority over something larger. He took pride in the shop's atmosphere. The word he used always was energy, and he considered himself skilled at reading a room and keeping it exactly the way the regulars expected it to be. He noticed Jessie Pena at around 8:35 a.m. He wasn't sure why she caught his attention. She wasn't loud. She wasn't taking up extra space. She wasn't doing anything that any of the other 24 people in the shop weren't also doing. She was sitting at a corner table with a laptop and a coffee, working. But something about her nagged at him in a way he didn't examine closely enough to name. She didn't look like she was waiting for someone. She didn't look like she was about to leave. She looked settled, comfortable, like she intended to stay. He watched her for 10 minutes, then another 5. At 8:51 a.m., Marcus Webb picked up his phone and called the non-emergency line. The dispatcher who answered was professional and methodical. Was the woman causing a disturbance? No. Had she violated any store policy? Not exactly. Was she a paying customer? Webb paused. She'd bought a coffee, yes, but that was almost 30 minutes ago. Had she been asked to leave by staff? No. Was she being threatening or aggressive in any way? No. The dispatcher logged the call anyway. A unit was available. One would be sent. Webb set his phone down and went back to watching the room. He told himself he was doing his job, maintaining the energy, looking out for the regulars. He did not ask himself why 30 other people had been sitting in that shop for just as long, some longer, without drawing a second glance from him. He didn't ask himself that question at all. Jury checkpoint. What the officer claimed. A paying customer was lingering too long and making other customers uncomfortable. What the law requires. Discomfort is not a crime. A business cannot lawfully call police on a paying customer who has violated no policy. Selective enforcement. Applying rules to one customer that are not applied to others in identical situations is textbook racial discrimination under the Civil Rights Act of 1964. You decide. Was Marcus Webb's call selective enforcement or legitimate concern? Drop your answer in the comments. Legal reality check. The rule. Selective enforcement occurs when a policy is applied to one person but not others in the same situation. It is illegal when the selection is based on race. The red flag. At least 30 other customers had been present in Bravo grounds for the same duration as Pena, some longer. None were reported. Pena was the only black woman seated alone. The consequence. This single fact, that identical behavior drew a 911 call for one customer and not for 30 others, became one of the most powerful pieces of evidence in Pena's civil rights lawsuit. Frank Simmons had been with the Houston Police Department for 9 years, and in that time he had accumulated a file that should have ended his career at least twice over. 13 complaints, 9 involving racial profiling, 4 involving unnecessary or excessive force. The Internal Affairs Division knew his name the way a doctor knows a recurring patient, not with alarm anymore, but with a tired, institutional familiarity that had long since replaced urgency. The pattern was not subtle. It did not require interpretation. It only required reading. There was the 16-year-old boy Simmons had stopped and questioned for 40 minutes outside an apartment building in 3rd Ward, the building where the boy lived, a fact his mother confirmed in person while Simmons was still detaining him. There was the Latino family in a Kroger parking lot whose minivan Simmons had blocked with his cruiser while he demanded proof they owned the vehicle they were loading their groceries into. There was the black woman Simmons had detained in the lobby of a downtown bank for, in his words, acting nervously in a financial institution. The woman who had been a loan officer at that bank for 6 years and was standing 15 feet from her own desk when he stopped her. Each incident had been documented. Each complaint had been filed. Witnesses had given statements. In 4 cases, supervisors had added formal notes to Simmons' record acknowledging a pattern of concern. And after every single one, Frank Simmons had been retrained, counseled, and returned to patrol. The department had a word for what it did with officers like Simmons. Called it remediation. What it actually was, measured in outcomes rather than intentions, was permission. Every complaint that was filed and then quietly resolved without consequence told Simmons the same thing. His judgment would be defended. His record would be managed. The city would absorb the friction so he could keep working. By the time Frank Simmons pulled up in front of Bravo Grounds Coffee on that Wednesday morning, the department had co-signed everything he was about to do. 13 complaints, 9 for racial profiling, still on patrol. Systemic failure or systemic intent? Drop your answer in the comments. Legal reality check. The rule. Under Section 1983 of Federal Civil Rights Law, a municipality can be held liable when an officer violates someone's rights as a result of official policy or a pattern of deliberate indifference. 13 complaints with no meaningful consequence constitutes a pattern. The red flag. The Houston Police Department received, documented, and reviewed 9 racial profiling complaints against Simmons. They retrained him and returned him to patrol each time, which legally signals institutional tolerance of his conduct. The consequence. This is why the city, not just Simmons, was named in the lawsuit, and it is why the city paid $3.3 million. Simmons walked through the door at 8:58 a.m. He stood just inside the entrance for a moment, scanning the room with the particular efficiency of someone who had already decided what he was looking for before he arrived. His eyes moved across the bar, across the tables near the window, and then settled without hesitation, without ambiguity, on Jesse Pena. He crossed the floor without stopping to speak to Marcus Webb, without asking any questions, without looking at anyone else. Pena became aware of him when he was 3 steps away. She looked up from her laptop and read the situation in under a second. The deliberate approach, the locked eye contact, the absence of any greeting. Officer Simmons, "Ma'am, I need you to pack up and go." She set her hands flat on the table, a measured, visible gesture. Agent P.A., "I'm sorry. Is there a problem? I'm a paying customer." Officer Simmons, "Management called it in. You've been here too long. Time to move." Agent P.A., "I bought a coffee 20 minutes ago. That's not a violation of anything. I haven't broken any policy. I haven't bothered anyone." Officer Simmons, "Are you leaving on your own or not?" She reached into the inside pocket of her blazer and produced her credentials. Black leather case, gold badge, federal photo identification. She opened it and held it toward him with the steadiness of someone who had done it 1,000 times. Agent PEA, "Officer, I am Special Agent Jesse Pena, FBI. I need you to look at what I'm showing you." Simmons glanced at it for less than 2 seconds. Officer Simmons, "Anyone can get one of those printed." The room had gone quiet. Not gradually, all at once, the way sound drops before something breaks. Phones were coming up around the room, screens tilting toward them. Pena raised her voice, controlled, clear, carrying to every corner of the space. "Agent PA, my name is Special Agent Jesse Pena, FBI. Badge number 2247. This officer is removing me from this coffee shop after I have identified myself with federal credentials. Everyone here is a witness." Simmons gripped her arm above the elbow and steered her toward the door. She didn't pull away. She didn't stumble. She closed her laptop with her free hand, picked up her bag, and walked, spine straight, chin level, navy blazer catching the morning light through the front windows, while a room full of strangers recorded every step in silence. Jury checkpoint. What the officer claimed. He had reasonable suspicion based on the manager's call. The badge could not be verified on site. What the law requires. Reasonable suspicion requires articulable facts about criminal activity, not a manager's discomfort. Federal credential verification is a standard procedural obligation before any physical intervention. Simmons had a phone. The FBI field office number is publicly listed. He made no call. You decide. Simmons had federal credentials in his hand and a phone in his pocket. Procedure or punishment? Which did he choose? She showed her badge. He said anyone could print one. He had a phone and never dialed. Coincidence or targeting? Drop your answer in the comments. The drive to the precinct took 11 minutes. Pena spent it in silence, cataloging everything. The time Simmons had entered the shop, the exact words he had used, the duration of his glance at her credentials, the grip on her arm, the angle of the phones in the room when she made her announcement. She had built federal cases from thinner material. She knew how to construct a timeline. She was already building one. At the front desk, the duty supervisor on watch was a 17-year veteran named Lieutenant Carol Dempsey. She looked up when Simmons walked Pena in, read the room in the practiced way of someone who had processed 1,000 arrivals, and asked a single question. "LT Dempsey, what do you have?" Officer Simmons, "Trespassing complaint. Bravo Grounds Coffee on Main. Subject refused to vacate after manager request and lawful order." Dempsey looked at Pena. "LT Dempsey, did you identify yourself?" Agent PA, "I did. By name, badge number, and bureau. I also presented my credentials," which Officer Simmons examined for approximately 2 seconds before stating that anyone could have them printed. The shift in Dempsey's expression was small but total. She held out her hand to Simmons. He passed over Pena's credentials without speaking. Dempsey examined them, the badge, the seal, the federal photo ID, then picked up the phone and dialed the FBI's Houston field office directly. For minutes, that was all it took. She set the phone down and looked at Frank Simmons with an expression he would not be able to describe afterward but would not forget. It was not anger. It was something quieter and more permanent than anger. LT Dempsey. Badge and weapon. Administrative leave effective right now. Simmons opened his mouth. Nothing came out. For 9 years, he had operated inside a system that absorbed his mistakes and sent him back out. That system had just stopped. He set his badge and his weapon on the desk with hands that were not entirely steady. Across the room, Jessie Pena pressed her fingers gently against the marks on her wrist where his grip had been, and said nothing. She didn't need to. She was already composing the first paragraph of what she would tell her attorneys. Jury checkpoint. What the officer claimed. He was responding to a trespassing complaint as called in. He had no obligation to verify credentials on the street. What the law requires. An officer who removes someone from a premises without probable cause of a crime commits unlawful detention. The Fourth Amendment prohibits seizure of a person without cause. The moment Dempsey confirmed Pena's identity in 4 minutes, Simmons' position became legally indefensible, because the verification he refused to perform in the field took less time than a coffee order. You decide. 4 minutes to verify. 0 minutes attempted. Was this oversight or intent? Drop your answer in the comments. Legal reality check. The rule, unlawful detention, also called false imprisonment, occurs when an officer restricts a person's freedom of movement without legal justification. Trespassing requires that the person has no right to be on the premises and has been asked to leave by authorized staff. The red flag. Pena was a paying customer who had violated no policy. The trespassing premise collapsed the moment she produced federal credentials. Simmons had no legal basis to continue the detention, and physical contact in the course of that detention constitutes coercion of a federal officer. The consequence. Every second Simmons continued after Pena produced her badge was an additional violation. The marks on her wrists became Exhibit A. The first video posted at 9:14 a.m., 16 minutes after Simmons had walked Pena out the door. It came from a woman who had been sitting 2 tables away, her phone angled low and steady the entire time. The footage was clean, unhurried. It captured Pena presenting her credentials, Simmons dismissing them in under 2 seconds, Pena's announcement to the room, the grip on her arm, and the long walk to the door, all of it in a single unbroken shot with audio clear enough to transcribe. By the time Pena was sitting in the precinct watching Dempsey pick up the phone, that video had 4,000 views. By the time Simmons surrendered his badge, it had 40,000. By noon, it had been viewed more than 3 million times across every major platform. It was not alone. For other angles emerged within the first 2 hours, different phones, different positions in the room, each one capturing something the others missed. Together they formed a complete, irrefutable record of everything that had happened from the moment Simmons walked through the door to the moment Pena walked out of it. The headlines arrived in waves. FBI agent escorted out of Houston coffee shop for sitting while black. Federal agent shows badge. Officer says anyone could print one. Coffee while black. Houston cop drives out 14-year FBI veteran. By early afternoon, the story had moved from local news to national broadcast. By evening, it had crossed into international outlets. The FBI issued a formal statement at 11:40 a.m., condemning the incident in unambiguous language and confirming Pena's credentials and active duty status. The NAACP called for an immediate independent investigation and the suspension of all officers named in the incident. 3 civil rights organizations announced they were monitoring the situation. 2 prominent civil rights attorneys had already reached Pena's personal phone before she left the precinct. Marcus Webb was terminated by Bravo Grounds ownership group at 2:15 p.m. The coffee shop released a public statement 2 hours later, apologizing without qualification and announcing an immediate suspension of all existing customer conduct protocols pending a full review. The story had left the building on Main Street. It belonged to the country now, and the country had questions that a termination and a public apology were nowhere near sufficient to answer. 5 video angles. 3 million views by noon. The FBI condemned it in writing. Was justice served by the court or by the camera? Drop your answer in the comments. Pena's attorneys filed suit 14 days after the incident. The complaint was 43 pages long and named 4 parties: Officer Frank Simmons, Marcus Webb, Bravo Grounds Coffee, and the city of Houston. The charges were precise and extensively documented. Unlawful detention without probable cause. Physical coercion of a federal officer in the exercise of her duties. Racial profiling in violation of federal civil rights statutes. Deliberate failure to verify federal credentials prior to initiating physical contact. And the charge that carried the most legal weight and the most institutional consequence. Systemic failure to supervise an officer with a documented, decade-long history of discriminatory conduct that the department had repeatedly acknowledged and repeatedly declined to stop. That last charge was the one that made the city's legal team go quiet. They reviewed the footage, all 5 angles. They reviewed Simmons' complaint history, 13 entries spanning 9 years, each one flagged, processed, and returned to the shelf. They reviewed the precinct intake recording, which captured Dempsey's 4-minute verification call and Simmons surrendering his badge with unsteady hands. They reviewed the dispatcher log from Marcus Webb's call, including the questions Webb had failed to answer satisfactorily before a unit was dispatched anyway. They arrived at a single word. The same word city legal teams always arrive at when the evidence is this clean and this complete and this public. Indefensible. The settlement was finalized 8 months after the filing. The city of Houston paid $3.3 million. Bravo Grounds Coffee's liability insurer paid an additional $700,000. Total $4 million. Every cent of it traceable back to a Wednesday morning when a shift manager made a phone call he had no real reason to make, and an officer dismissed a federal badge he had every procedural obligation to verify. Frank Simmons was formally terminated 6 weeks after the incident. His name was entered into the National Decertification Index, the federal database that ensures a law enforcement officer fired for misconduct cannot simply cross a county line and pin on a new badge. His career in law enforcement ended at 36 years old, 9 years in, with 13 complaints and 1 catastrophic morning as his entire legacy. He will not work in this field again. Jury checkpoint. What the officer claimed. The city settled to avoid a costly trial, not as an admission of wrongdoing. What the law requires. Settlement is not absolution. When a government body pays $3.3 million to resolve a civil rights claim, it is, by definition, acknowledging that its officers' conduct exposed the city to legal liability. The National Decertification Index exists precisely because "it won't happen again here" is not sufficient protection when officers simply relocate. You decide. $4 million paid. Career ended. Was this justice or just the cost of getting caught? Drop your answer in the comments. Legal reality check. The rule. Under 42 U.S.C. Section 1983, any person acting under color of state law who deprives another of their constitutional rights is liable. Government entities are liable when the rights violation results from official policy or deliberate indifference to known patterns of misconduct. The red flag. The city had 9 documented racial profiling complaints against Simmons. It chose remediation over removal 13 times. That choice, not just Simmons' conduct on one morning, is what cost Houston $3.3 million. The consequence. The city paid. The taxpayers paid. And the lesson, if it becomes one, is that indifference to misconduct is not a neutral position. It has a price tag. 6 weeks after the settlement was finalized, Jessie Pena walked into Houston City Council chambers and took her seat at the testimony table. She was wearing the navy blue blazer. She sat upright, both feet on the floor, hands folded in front of her. The same posture she had held at that corner table in Bravo Grounds on a Wednesday morning when she had done nothing wrong and paid for it anyway. The room was full. Council members, press, community advocates. HPD leadership in the back rows with the careful expressions of people waiting to see how much damage was still coming. Pena pulled the microphone toward her and spoke without notes. Agent P. I showed my badge. I identified myself clearly. I announced my name, my badge number, and my bureau loud enough for every person in that room to hear. I complied completely and without resistance. She paused. Agent P. None of it mattered, because Officer Simmons had already decided what I was before he crossed the room. The credentials didn't change his conclusion. They just became one more thing to dismiss. She let that sit for a moment. Agent P. I want to be precise about something. What happened to me is not remarkable. It is not an isolated failure of one officer on one morning. This happens every day to people who don't carry federal credentials, to people who have no badge to show and no bureau behind them, to people who comply completely and are not believed, to people whose names don't make the news and whose stories don't end in settlements. If it can happen to me with everything I have, then it is happening to everyone without it. Every single day. The Department of Justice opened a pattern and practice investigation into the Houston Police Department 30 days after her testimony. The findings confirmed what Pena's lawsuit had already argued in 43 pages. The problem was not Frank Simmons. The problem was the architecture that built him, protected him, and sent him back out 13 times. Reforms were announced. Mandatory suspension after 5 profiling complaints. Federal credential verification protocols written into standard procedure. An independent civilian oversight board established with real subpoena power and no departmental veto. Words on paper. Promises in chambers. The kind of language that sounds like change and sometimes even becomes it. But Jessie Pena knows something that settlements and reforms cannot touch. She knows what it felt like to hold out her badge. 14 years, 2 U.S. attorney commendations, 11 months of case work on her laptop screen, and watch a man glance at it for 2 seconds and decide it wasn't real. She knows what it costs to walk out of a room with your head up when every instinct is telling you that you should not have to. The villain in this story was never just Frank Simmons. It was every supervisor who read a complaint and filed it away. Every review board that called a pattern insufficient. Every system that chose to manage the friction instead of stopping the source. Simmons is gone. The city paid. The reforms are written down somewhere in a municipal document that someone will have to fight to enforce. The question that remains, the one that Pena's testimony left hanging in that chamber and that no settlement has ever answered, is what we are willing to demand before the next Wednesday morning. Before the next coffee shop. Before the next person sits down, opens their laptop, and finds out exactly how much their credentials are worth to someone who has already made up his mind. Jury checkpoint. What the officer claimed. The reforms represent systemic accountability. The settlement represents justice served. What the law requires. Pattern and practice investigations are triggered when a department demonstrates repeated, systemic violations of civil rights. Reforms only work if enforced. The same department that received 13 complaints against one officer and took 9 years to remove him is now responsible for implementing mandatory oversight of itself. You decide. Reforms announced. Oversight promised. Do you believe them? Yes or no? Jessie Pena had every credential the system could grant. It still wasn't enough. Is this one officer's failure or everyone's problem? Drop your answer in the comments. Frank Simmons will not work in law enforcement again. Marcus Webb will not manage another establishment without that Wednesday morning following him. The city of Houston paid $4 million, which means the people of Houston paid it. For a decision made in under 2 seconds by an officer who had been warned 13 times. These stories don't tell themselves. They require someone willing to document them, build them carefully, and put them in front of people who need to see them. If you believe that accountability starts with awareness, that the first step to changing a system is understanding exactly how it works and exactly where it fails, then this channel is where you need to be. Subscribe. Not for us. For the next Jessie Pena, the one who doesn't have a badge to show, who doesn't have the FBI behind her, whose story ends before it ever reaches a courtroom. The one whose name you will never know unless someone decides it matters. We are not done. The next case is already waiting. Drop your verdict below.